In this video, we will talk about eye movements, how the eyes move when we read, and what this tells us about what is going on. If we look at a single word to read it, then obviously we fixate our eyes on it, and then we take in the information from its letters. But normal reading is not about recognizing or reading aloud individual words. Instead, words are in sentences. So when reading this word, it is usually surrounded by other words. What is important to understand is that our eyes do not have sufficient resolution to recognize letters except at the very center of our visual field. That is the very word we're looking at. If you think that sounds strange, if you have the impression that you can glance at a page and read most of the words of it without actually going through the sentences, then you can do a simple experiment. Just pick up any book, open up a random page, fixate your eyes on a single word, and then very carefully, without moving your eyes, while holding your gaze fixated on that same word, try to guess what the word above or below it, or the words to the side. You will realize very quickly that this is impossible. The only way to say what the words above, below, or next to it are to actually move your gaze to them. So when you're looking at one word, as in this example, when you're looking at the word fox, you can distinguish some letters around your center of the visual field. But then after that, things get really blurry really fast. Indeed, our visual field is split into three regions. The fovea, which is the very center and is only 2 degrees of angle wide, is the high acuity region where we can see every fine detail. The parafovea, which extends a few degrees to each side, is a region where we can see still some detail, which deteriorates as we move over to the periphery, the so-called peripheral vision, which is very wide, extends all the way to our sides, but there is very little acuity there, and we can mostly see large shapes and motion. What this means is, if we are going to read the words in a sentence, we have to actually look at almost all of them. Let me show you a couple of examples of eye movements during reading. The following video shows you an adult skilled reader reading through a text that they've never seen before, but not a particularly demanding text. Did you notice how the eyes were moving on the text? Here you can see the trace of all gaze points that the eyes went through in this video. You can see that there are some regions where the gaze stays for a little while, and then the gaze jumps to another place, stays for a little while, jumps, and so on. It never stays exactly stationary, but it certainly doesn't scan the line as you might have expected. Instead, you see a series of jumps and fixations. Let's look at another example. And the trace of these is this one, which is very similar to the previous one. These are actual data from an adult skilled reader reading their native language, but the pattern is the same as has been observed very many times across very many languages. In general, we distinguish the following kinds of patterns when we look at eye movements during reading. The first thing that you have noticed is that there are fixations. Fixations are when the eye seems to almost stop or stay about at the same point for a little while, about a quarter or a third of a second, to gather information from the letters around that point. And then the eye moves. And the kinds of movements are forward saccades, so jumping from one word to another one that is later, not necessarily the immediately next one. There can be skips, so this word is skipped if there is no fixation on it, but a forward saccade takes the gaze from this word to this word, and then a series of forward saccades generally takes the eye through all or most of the words, and at the end of the line we have the return sweep, which is a huge eye movement to the beginning of the next line or very close to it with some correction. And then we have again the forward saccades. Sometimes, as you must have noticed in the videos, you can go back and look at them again, there are regressions. Regressions are saccades to previous words. It doesn't have to be the immediately previous word. You will see regressions that are further back in the sentence or further back sometimes in the passage. There is also the possibility of refixation. This is another fixation on the same word, and you will see plenty of refixations, especially on longer words. There has been a lot of study of how the eyes move during reading, and there are some complicated theoretical models that account for the observed patterns. The general idea that people are converging on is that the control of eye movements is extremely efficient by a skilled reader, and that the eyes prepare to move on to the next word before they're done recognizing the fixated word. This means that as soon as we think we almost have recognized the word, the programming of a saccade is initiated, so that the eyes move at about the same time when we have completed recognition of the previous word. And this accounts for maximum efficiency because we do not waste any time on a word waiting to program the next eye movement. There are some people who claim that having to move your eyes slows you down during reading, but this is a big misunderstanding. A very important question concerns how much information we can get from every fixation. An important theoretical development has distinguished between two things. One is the observable point of gaze, so the fixation where the eye is looking at, which we can observe using an eye tracker. That's one thing. And this is usually coupled with our attention. So we attend to the thing that we're looking at and a bit in the near surroundings. However, it is possible that we can shift our attention within the visual field of high acuity without moving the eyes. So it is possible to start attending to the next word before we decide to move our eyes to it, or even instead of moving our eyes to it, in which case we can skip it. This is called a preview, as if someone is previewing the next word before actually turning to look at it. So the important question here is, how much information are we actually getting from one gaze? When we fixate a word, how many letters are we processing? This has occupied researchers for a while, and there are very clear answers. There is a very interesting way researchers have come up with to study this. Here is a sentence that is presented for participants to read while their eye movements are tracked. The asterisk here indicates the fixation. So this is representation of a moment at which the sentence is seen and the person is looking at the word link. And then the person presumably processes the word link and moves over to the next one. So at the next instant, the gaze is fixated here in the middle of the word between. And then after some time, the eyes will move on to the next one and will go to the word I, and so on. So this is normal reading of normal text. What researchers have been able to do is to replace a lot of text with just letters X or something that is not helping understand what the words are. So for example, if someone is looking at the word link, the computer may present the word link in the next one and replace every other letter in every other word with an X. When the participant is done looking at the word link and moves over to the next one, so the gaze fixates here, then the computer presents this word and replaces everything else with X. And when the eyes move on to the next one, then these two words are shown and the rest is replaced with X's. What this means is that the display is changing all the time depending on where you're looking at. If you're a participant in this experiment, you don't realize that almost all the text you're looking at is X's because every word you fixate will be presented normally. Computers are so fast that they can replace every word you're not looking at with X's and turn the word you're looking at into the normal presentation before you have the time to realize it. So you can keep looking around the text and see only normal words, but someone behind your back will see that almost all the text is X's. Now, this may sound very funny, but is also very important because we can manipulate how many letters the person reading the text can see. Here is another condition. So if the eye is fixated on this letter, then we show 4 letters to the left and up to 14 letters to the right, and everything else is X's. Then the eye moves to the next word, and we show up to 4 letters to the left, 14 to the right, and the rest is X's, and so on. The display adapts. Now, why would they do that? Well, if replacing a letter with an X slows you down, this means that you were using that letter and replacing it with the X has disrupted your reading. So, if presenting only one word slows you down, it means that you were actually retrieving information from additional words before, and that's why you were reading at that speed. But if replacing all the other words with X's doesn't slow you down, it means you're only using information from one word. So researchers have used this, and by varying the number of words or the number of letters that they're presenting to participants in this display adaptive way, they have been able to determine the extent of the region from which we extract information when we read, which is about 4 letters to the left and 14 to the right for skilled readers. And it does vary with language. The more interesting thing is that it also varies with reading development stage. So researchers have done this at different ages. And starting with grade 1, we see that first graders who can look at the full display of a whole sentence can read at about 40 words per minute. If we only show them 7 characters and the rest is X's, they can still read at about 40 words per minute. If we show them only 4 or 3 letters, they read at about the same rate. If there is a degradation, it is extremely slight. It looks like first graders can only retrieve information for a few letters with each fixation. So they need to make many more fixations to retrieve all the information to read the words than a skilled reader, because they get only a few letters in each time. What about second graders? If they have all the information available, they read at about 90 words per minute. If they have 7 letters available, they still read at about 90 words per minute, but if they have fewer, then they start to slow down. This means that second graders can see more letters than first graders with each fixation, and indeed up to about 7. So the field of view for reading widens as children become able to process more letters simultaneously. Third graders can read at about 130 words per minute if they have the full information, and begin to slow down already if they can only see 7 letters. And they are slowed down very, very much if they only have 3 letters available. This means that third graders can actually use information from several letters simultaneously when they read. And when that information is not displayed, then they are necessarily slowed down very much. And this is also seen with fourth graders even more abruptly. So as reading skill improves, readers can take in more and more letters simultaneously, but this has a limit, and this is the limit of human visual acuity, which cannot extend beyond 15 letters or so. Another important observation about reading is when you're reading aloud, you necessarily must look at each word before you can pronounce it. This sounds very obvious. Every skilled reader has observed that they are looking ahead of the word that they're saying. This has been demonstrated by looking at eye movements for more than 100 years, but researchers have recently started to look more deeply into it. These are some example data from German, and these are for sentences that were displayed on this screen. But here, for the purposes of the graph, the words of the sentence are shown on the vertical axis, but the words were shown normally as a normal sentence in the middle of the screen. And what we see here is where the voice is and where the eye is at any moment. So the eye is the orange line, and the first thing that happens when someone has to see this sentence, when this sentence is displayed on the screen, is to look at the first word. So time 0 is the first fixation somewhere on the first word. And then about a third of a second later, the eyes leave this word and jump to the next word. And about another third of a second later, the eyes leave this word and jump to the third word. And while the eyes are in the third word, before they jump again, the person starts to say the first word. So this is how long it takes from the moment one looks at the word to the moment one is ready to start pronouncing it. And within that time, the eyes have jumped 2 words ahead. And from that point on, in a regular reading without interruptions, we can see that the eyes jump and the voice follows, and there is an approximately 2-word distance. Sometimes the eyes need to make a refixation, for example, on this long word or this very long word, in which case the voice can somewhat catch up. There is catch up here as well. Other times what happens is that the eyes may jump a little too far down from the voice, and then they pull back to be closer to the voice so that they remain at a distance of about 1 to 2 words ahead. This is called the eye-voice span, the distance between the word you're looking at and the word you're speaking. And the fact that this is more than 1 for skilled readers means that you must temporarily store somewhere internally the words that you have already looked at but haven't yet said. These words must be somewhere waiting to be spoken while your eye moves ahead to the next one and while you're still saying the previous one. So this means that skilled reading involves buffering or temporary storage of words between the gaze and the voice. One other important thing that affects reading and the eye movements in reading is interpretation of what you're reading. To illustrate this idea, I will show you examples from one experiment in which the researchers examined the effects of different ways to resolve similar looking words. Look at this beginning of a sentence. The brilliant report. It looks like there is a report, and this report is brilliant. So the first interpretation of this sentence is that this is an adjective. However, this kind of sentence beginning can have two different continuations in English, both of which are grammatical. They're perfectly acceptable. The first one is the expected one. We're talking about a report, which is brilliant and which was accepted. However, it is also possible to say that the brilliant, meaning the brilliant people, and these kinds of people, the brilliant ones, report the best ideas. So here, this is a noun, but here, this is a verb. And this is something that works very easily in English. So you can make different kinds of pairs, contrasting interpretations of noun versus verb with different kinds of words. In this kind of word, the brilliant abstract was accepted, but the brilliant abstract the best ideas. So this and this, they look the same, they have the same orthographic word form, but they don't have the same phonological word form. In contrast, report, which is the example we saw before, have the same phonological word form as well, and they're only distinguished syntactically, and of course by the meaning that is associated with the different syntactic roles. Finally, there are other words that cannot be interpreted in two ways. So a paper is always a noun, and to suggest is always a verb. So what if you present one of these sentences and trace how the eye moves to read it? So if we're looking at a sentence like this that is not ambiguous, the brilliant is ambiguous because when you first read it, you expect this to be an adjective. So when you hit paper, when you look at paper, your expectation is actually confirmed and you just keep on reading. But if you read the brilliant and then move your eye to suggest, your expectation is disconfirmed. The fact that you hit a verb here means that this could not have been an adjective. It has to be about the brilliant people. So you delay here. You sit a little bit longer on this word because you have to reanalyze syntactically what you're reading. In contrast, when you have sentences of this sort, by the time you get to report, you still think in both cases that this is a noun. You can only figure out that this is not an adjective as you expected from here. You can only figure it out if you look further down. So by the time you're at report, everything is going fine, and then you think these are adjectives, and then you move on, and then this makes you reanalyze, and so realize that what you thought the sentence was saying is wrong. So you have a processing cost, and you sit longer here because the system has to wait for the syntax to be reanalyzed. In the third case, the thing is now this word is not one word, and when you see it, You can't know for sure if it's abstract or abstract. You expect to be abstract because this is analyzed as an adjective, the brilliant abstract, but you can preview the next word. And the preview can indicate that you may not be selecting the correct version of this. So this orthographic form for a skilled reader is linked to two phonological forms. And sometimes you have the time to resolve it based on the preview. So there is a processing cost, a smaller processing cost, but can come earlier, indicating selection problems. This is all something that normally happens in the course of reading a sentence. We rarely notice some things, but they're measurable with eye movements. And this tells us what the mind is doing while we're reading a sentence. So eye movements in reading have been used in a lot of research, and they indicate that our eyes aren't just passively taking in information, but they function more like active information seekers because the eye movements are programmed to take the eyes to the next place where it will get the most useful information. There is a continuous and very tight coordination and synchronization such that practically no time is wasted. For a skilled reader, the system works so well and so efficiently that the eye lands on the next fixation spot precisely as soon as the previous words have been recognized and analyzed. There is continuous online processing and monitoring, which sometimes leads to regressions if there have been any unexpected problems in processing or analysis. The whole system is governed by lexical access, that is, by how long it takes to recognize the words and to retrieve their meanings, and is also modulated by comprehension. That means that whether we understand or not, or whether we need to reanalyze, can slow down or redirect our eye movements to gather the necessary information. Eye movement patterns reflect experience with word and text, and it is in fact quite easy to distinguish a beginner from a skilled reader from their eye movement patterns. And for a very skilled reader, what is attained through reading development gradually is near optimal resource allocation, where words are recognized automatically at the rate of eye movements, and at the same time, most of our cognitive resources are devoted to understanding the text.